Hi, I'm Katie Watson, and welcome back to another episode of Cybersecurity in Focus, a podcast brought to you by Seek on Cyber. Today, I'm joined by Emma Mackenzie. Emma is a cybersecurity and risk professional, specializing in governance, resilience, and regulatory alignment across financial services. What I really like about Emma's perspective is that it is both practical and business focused. In this episode, we talk about something that shows up everywhere, the silo between GRC and SOC. What Emma's learned from working in both sides, and how you can translate things like vulnerabilities, patching decisions, and resilience into a language that businesses can actually act upon, especially within a regulatory environment that's only getting stricter. So without further ado, let's get into it. Hey, Emma, thank you so much for joining me on Cybersecurity in Focus. It's great to have you here today.
Hi.
All the way from Scotland, we are very lucky to have you. And I think where I want to start this episode is actually how you got into cybersecurity, because you are a career switcher, right?
I am. I was a hairdresser, makeup artist, running my own business, and I switched into cyber via a boot camp that led me to a role in governance and risk and into this wonderful world that we all love.
It is absolutely fantastic. And I think you can get a sense, especially from your LinkedIn, what you talk about, and even just meeting you in person, that you love this stuff. And what was it that initially drew you to cyber?
So it wasn't something that I had even thought about. It was a friend's husband trying to get my husband to do a course to get him to change careers. When we saw them at New Year, January 2022, and he told me that his friend was on this boot camp. He was only halfway through the part-time course and he had just got a job. And obviously at this point it's post-COVID. Being a hairdresser had been one of the first industries that shut down. So I was kind of open to exploring other careers, but it wasn't something I specifically was looking at. Didn't even know it was a thing, to be honest. I mean, I knew my friend's husband worked in cybersecurity, but who knew what that was? So yeah, I looked at the pre-course for the boot camp, signed up to that, flew through it in about less than a week. It was just so addictive. The amount of content they put in it was all the fun stuff, the cyber stalking, the Facebook stuff, the fact that when things go on the internet, it's never really gone because it's archived and you can always find really old stuff that people have deleted. And I just fell in love with it. So I then ended up doing a couple of Cisco certifications that were free just to make sure that I wasn't just interested in the fun stuff. It taught me a little bit about networking and those kind of bits. I was told, don't do too much, you'll get bored. I'm like, surely it's better to get bored before I join the course and sign up. And I haven't got bored. I absolutely love everything about it. There's just always something new, something interesting. And if you get a little bit bored in one area, you just move into a different area and there's a whole other world there.
I think you've really hit the nail on the head with how broad cyber is. It's cybersecurity, but then there's so many different aspects of it, and there's something for everyone in this industry. And I think that's what leads me nicely onto my next question, which is you initially started in GRC, right? And now you've moved more into the SOC side. What have you learned from going from GRC to more SOC?
I have learned that what we think the organizations are doing based on a GRC risk lens isn't necessarily what's happening. Like, we are doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing, but are we really doing it in depth enough to what the people at the top think we're doing? So it's really given me a view of the issues you have in trying to get these things in place. Everybody wants to do the right thing. All the teams want to do the right thing, but it's just not always practical to do it. Take, for instance, patch management. That's one of the areas that I'm involved in. And it could be that, depends on the organization you're in, but I work in financial services. You've got a whole load of legacy tech there with a whole load of stuff put on top that's really business critical. And we can't always patch. You just assume that security patch, it's there to fix a vulnerability. You can't always do it because by fixing it, you might break the thing above it that the business requires to do. It's getting that back and forth, making sure there's mitigations in place that will protect for the fact you can't patch that machine. But it's a lot harder than just saying, right, we need to do this, go do it.
Yeah, I think you've got that really unique experience. And that's one of the reasons I wanted you on the podcast, is because you've done both GRC and you're now more in the cybersecurity, patching side of things. And I think, would it be fair to say that in some organizations, there can be a silo between the two?
Absolutely. I don't think it's some organizations. I think it's probably all organizations.
Fair enough. I didn't want to assume, but from even conversations I've had at events, it's you've got the GRC people here, you've got the like cybersecurity people here. And even though you both have the shared goal of defending the business, you don't have the shared goals when you're in your day to day, like I need to do this, I need to do that. And it can sometimes create conflicts maybe.
Yeah, there's definitely conflicting priorities in there. But it's the same with the actual business. The business wants to go ahead and bring in these new tools and use these new products, and we don't want to stop them, but we'd want them to do it securely. And trying to get those teams to line up to be able to do that from the start and help the business is really difficult because, well, you've got a new tool and it's got AI. Who knows what the risks of some of these are? And the business bringing it in doesn't know what the data processing links are there. It's just so conflicting all over. It's one of the things I've found at the SOC actually is that the team are really focused on the threats. They're really focused on the alerts and things like that and the controls, which is great. But it's as simple as saying someone in the business needs to access a website and we've got that website blocked. What's their justification? They just want to access it. The people in the SOC would literally just say, no, you can't have access to that. That's just a no. But actually, the business needs that access because that's part of something that they're possibly investing in and they need the documents from that website. So it's weighing up that risk, having the business justification and them owning the risk of them accessing that information, there being something malicious. We've just got to hope that the controls we've got in place would prevent any of that happening had there be something that we can't see from it.
I think that's becoming more and more clear in every conversation I'm having on this podcast is that you've got like the best practices, kind of fast and hard rules of cybersecurity. So like block this site, don't allow this, zero trust. And in principle, really, really good to have this. The problems come when you introduce people into the situation and you introduce business goals and needs. And that is when I think that tension starts to come in. And it is very difficult to then grow, especially at the rate that some organizations want to grow at and be secure. And do you have any advice or tips when it comes to, you mentioned like introducing a new product with AI? Because I know that a lot of companies and a lot of IT leaders are being faced with, we need to adopt this system, but that system would keep you up at night.
I think my main advice is making sure that security are in there right at the start. It's not that they're there to stop you doing it. It's that making sure there's controls and mitigations in place all the way through so that you can do it safely. And that's really difficult because the business sees us as someone that says no to things. And security sees it as we kind of want to say no, and it's hard to articulate the risk in terms that the business will understand. So it's getting that nice balance of what's important for the business versus making sure it can be done safely. Ultimately, if it came to a product that the amount of controls you had to put in place to prevent whatever it was cost more than a breach, then why would you spend the money on the controls? Because the breach would be cheaper. That's when you weigh up the business risk. You've got to always look at the best interests of the business because without the business, you don't need security.
It is one of those like cold, hard truths that maybe as cyber people, we don't want to think about, but it is actually, you're right. And so do you think, because your perspective on this, I always find really unique, do you come up with things like that? Do you think that's actually come from your previous career of owning a business that you think about it in that perspective?
Absolutely not. Not something I thought about whatsoever. I mean, there was always the fact that in my previous business, I had to always make sure I had clients. I had to make sure they were operating in a safe environment. But ultimately, if the salon had some sort of power outage, without those customers coming in, I'm not making any money whatsoever. And that's the same for a whole big business because that's what would pay my salary at the end of the day. So I would have to look for another option. And it could be I'd maybe go to that customer's house. I don't know what their environment's like. I don't know if that's safe, but it means I can still perform the very minimal I need to keep my business viable.
I was like, I just asked her right on the spot to make an analogy between hairdressing and cybersecurity. I realized that as I asked you, I should have gave you a bit more prep for that question, but I think it works. It works. And I think that it always will come down to the business needs. And I think that we are seeing cybersecurity now become very much a business it's always been a business requirement, but at a board level now it's a top discussion. And now we are having a situation where cybersecurity teams need to talk, maybe not the teams, but the leaders need to talk to the board more. And that keyword that keeps coming up is risk, and you translating cyber security issues to risk. And obviously, with a background in GRC, I feel like you'll have some good tips on what to look for when you start to describe a risk to an organization.
Yeah, for me, it was always about translating it to what it means for the business. So,
okay,
back to the patching, for instance. You've got your server underneath. It can't be patched because the stuff on the tops really, really can't interact with this new patch, these new things. But that's a critical business application. So translating that risk, if we didn't have mitigations that we could put in place to protect that server that we're not going to patch, it'd be explaining to the business that, okay, so you've got this application, it brings in X amount of money. What happens if it stops? Because you're worried about the patch stopping it, but what happens if there's a security flaw and it's breached? So you're not just going to have the loss of income from that application going down. You're then got all these customers whose data might be breached that's also going to cost in fines. So how much would it cost to replace the server properly rather than just patch it so that it's a nice up-to-date one and that application can sit in it? How long is that going to take? How many days or weeks would that application have to either be moved, or can it be transferred? Can it be left where it is and we just set up a whole new one and build the application on top again? And you've got to weigh up those costs and putting it in actual financial terms to that business when they realize that actually their application, if it gets taken out, is going to cost them, say, 30 million in fines and dealing with claims for security breach and then rebuilding it anyway, compared to the maybe 500,000 that it costs to replace the server and just have a little bit of downtime. That weighs it up in their terms, rather than just saying, oh, attacker could breach that. They can come in this way and they'll use that attack and that vulnerability and this is what will happen. The business doesn't understand that. They need to know it in the term that actually affects them, their risk term, rather than our risk terms.
That makes so much sense. And I think, especially the way you described it, that you have to ask those questions and actually look at sometimes the easiest option may actually be the one that is the hardest initially when you look at it, like completely replacing a server, rebuilding. That might be like at first, oh, that's a lot of money. But when you say it like that, then you also provide the business with enough information to make the decision. Yeah. And that information is something that, you know, people not in security would not know. You just wouldn't know how much that would cost. You wouldn't know, you might not even know that's a possibility for you to do.
Yeah. You can almost back it up with facts now as well, because there's that much in the media that you can back up. Okay, well, this similar vulnerability was the reason that company went down, and this is the numbers of what they've lost because of it, the amount of downtime, the amount of recovery time. So you're not just saying this could happen and this is what it would cost. You're backing it up with actual evidence that supports it.
And that's so key, is when it comes to getting budget, because that is also one of the challenges cybersecurity leaders face, is getting that budget. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. Using the evidence that is being put in newspapers and on the media and everyone is seeing to say, actually, if you want to know how much this would cost, this is the figure because it's cost someone else this, is really powerful and a really great way to start to get more budget in cybersecurity, and also help explain why you need that budget to use it in certain ways, like if you're going to replace your technology that can't be patched. And that is a really effective way of translating that to leadership. So thank you. So to go back to what you're doing now on a day-to-day basis, what is life like in internal security operations?
So the CSOC, my job title doesn't really, it probably doesn't translate to what my job is, because a lot of people would think, okay, she works in the CSOC, she's an analyst, she's probably dealing with alerts, she's dealing with incident response things. I'm not involved in any of that. I get a little bit of insight in it when the teams are dealing with things, but it's not my main job. I think I sit within the cyber defense side of the team. So it's more focused on the vulnerability management. It's more focused on dealing with pen test remediation and timelines and reaching out to stakeholders to make sure these things are getting done and getting justifications if they can, and making sure they understand the risk if they're accepting it. I feel like I've come in and I'm kind of laying out the governance for this team now and the things they need to do for the regulations, because the cybersecurity regulations are all hyping up. There's all these new things that they need to do. We're financial services, we're a global company, so we're affected by the DORA regulation, which is really, really quite strong. So there's a lot of uplift. It's got a lot of focus on evidence, proving what you're saying. One of the examples I always use is a lot of regulations say, have you got logging and monitoring?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I've got logging and monitoring. What am I logging and monitoring? Because they don't tell you that. Whereas this is saying, have you got logging and monitoring? Can you prove you've got it? Can you evidence that it's been tested and that the controls you've got in place are effective? So it's still not as prescriptive as you'd really like, But as long as you can justify every decision you've made and all the things in the line, it means you're compliant. So I feel like that's kind of what I've come in, and I'm laying that out, and I'm helping support the team and helping them understand from a risk perspective rather than just a reactive perspective for what they do.
I think as well, your role is really showing the direction cyber is going in as well, with the need for that, the need for communicating to stakeholders, being able to describe that risk and quantify it. And that is kind of showing us the direction cyber is going in, because roles like that, it's maybe not what you would expect your day-to-day look like when you look at your job title. But the reality is it's super crucial. And without that, it's really hard to drive decisions and change within cyber. I think it's one of those things that the industry is changing, and your job maybe wouldn't have existed or seen as, needed rather than an analyst like 10 years ago. And it's showing the pace of the industry. I absolutely loved as well that you brought DORA into the conversation, because I did so much research on DORA last year. But from your perspective, what impact do you think regulations like DORA are going to have on other regulations? Is it kind of paving the way for maybe becoming a bit more tighter or requiring more evidence?
I think it's possibly paving the way for more frameworks to be built that support it. The main thing in DORA is about resilience. We all know that there's going to be security flaws, there's going to be risk acceptance where we maybe wouldn't like it, but it's got that full emphasis on the resilience, the recovery, making sure that if something happens, that we can recover. And even if it's not in the time that we would hope to do for the business, we can get the minimum business requirements. Like I said, with the hairdressing analogy, if I couldn't work in the salon, I can work from their home. That's my backup. It's making sure that businesses are still here in another 10, 15, 20 years and not be taken down and completely gone because there was an attack and everything's gone and we didn't plan for it. I think a lot of regulations are probably going to be using DORA, with it being the European one, using DORA as a bit of guidance to help shape, because obviously we've got the UK cybersecurity resilience bill that's coming in, which is going to be similar, affects different industries. But again, it's been coming for a while and it's still not quite shaped what the scope is going to be, the third parties, the fourth parties, the fifth parties, the controls that need to be in place. That it's just such a minefield, I think, regulation. But I do think it is going in the right way to help, as long as it doesn't just become another regulation where compliance is just a tick box and it's not really showing the stuff underneath that's needed to show security rather than just compliance.
Is there a way to stop compliance just becoming a tick box exercise? Does that come from the regulation itself, or does it come from the people enacting, like checking it off the compliances? Is there like a way we can prevent that from happening?
I think if regulators, not that we want them to be too prescriptive, because it's not a one size fits all. Every business is different. They've all got different goals. They've all got different things they need to focus on. I don't think it's necessarily that we need the regulators to be more prescriptive, but it would be good for the standards to be more prescriptive. I quite like the way ISO works, where you've got ISO 27001 and it's got its list of controls and you have to go through them all. But as long as you can justify why one's not there, that's fine. You have the evidence and justify it and you can still get your ISO certification. I think that's kind of what we want. We should be seeing more from resilience. But again, if it's just another one that says, have you got logging and monitoring, and you say yes, and you can prove you've got that tool that logs and monitors, but no one's checking what it's logging and monitoring, no one's looking at those logs. Do you know what I mean? How often is it being monitored? How often is it being reviewed? And then that just does make it a tick box.
Yeah, we don't really want it to become sort of a performative thing that organizations do. We've checked it off, we've got the certification. And actually, when you dig a bit deeper, it's like, what are you actually achieving? What are you actually protecting with what you've got installed? I think, especially for small to medium enterprise businesses as well, they're in that tricky spot where they don't have massive budgets, but they actually are being targeted more and more. For those organizations, something like going straight into an ISO could probably feel quite overwhelming. For those situations, where would you sort of advise, and I completely understand it depends on industry, the business setup, where would you advise they sort of begin to look at their security infrastructure?
I think it's the basics. It's looking at your access management policies. It's making sure people only have access to what they need to have access to. I think network segmentation is one of the key ones to have. It's making sure that you've got your crown jewels separate and it's only certain access that can get to it. So if there was malware, it can't actually get to that system without that privilege. And then knowing what you've got, knowing what your assets are. You can't monitor risks if you don't know what they are. So what are your assets? What are the vulnerabilities on them? Who's accessing those assets? Access management and logging and things are really, really important. And they are really basic cyber hygiene. So without all the tools and things, you do still need all that.
I've had this in a few episodes where it is like, go back to basics. Don't overcomplicate everything so straight away. Go back to basics. And you mentioned a really important thing as well that's come up a few times in conversations I've been having in the industry, which is the recovery side. And I think that is becoming more and more prevalent because, I mean, if I had a pound for every time I heard, it's not if you get a cyber attack, it's when you get a cyber attack. That now brings into question recovery. For organizations approach now thinking, wow, I need to look at my recovery. Where would you advise they begin with that?
Well, test the systems that they need. You'd start with obviously determining what's the minimum business viability. What services do we need? What's the minimum stuff we need to keep our business running? Once you've got that, you're testing those systems. How quickly can you bring them back online? How quickly can you get other things in place if you have to rebuild infrastructure? So it's lots of testing and tabletop exercises, attacking from all different angles. I was at a conference thing yesterday, and one of the examples they gave us was, I think the person had said they were speaking to a security team in like a hospital, and they were creating a scenario for the hospital to respond to. And it was, someone had gone in and blown themselves up in a hospital. That is a shocking incident. It wasn't something anyone had ever thought of, because their morals would be thinking, why would someone come in and blow themselves up in a hospital? But that's the kind of thinking. You don't know what your attackers' motivations are. You don't know what they're thinking. You have to account for all the horrible things that can happen, because if I can think of them, they can think of them. So it's testing for everything. But there's also the part where we'll run a test, and you've got your team that run that test, and they're used to dealing with that test. But have you actually got all the people in the room that in a real incident would be managing that? Have you considered the fact that you need to contact your cyber insurance provider to let them know and allow them to be part of that incident and make sure it's running properly? And have you accounted for the fact that your turnover for that test, whilst in a test environment, might only be 24, 48 hours to recovery, that in a real live incident, that could be 3 to 6 months of 24-hour incident response. Wow. Can your team cope with it? What's your backup plan for replacing people and making sure people have got that respite that they need during these periods? I think that's a lot of the things that companies don't think about. They don't think about the long-term downtime of these events.
Yeah, I guess when you run that tabletop exercise, it kind of ends at the end of the day. You've done it, well done. But those 3 to 6 months that actually in a real life incident will affect you, I mean, it slows everything down. You cannot be, I think, up and running. I think I remember, going to that big retailer who had that breach, and it was a couple of months after, and I was getting money exchanged. And the guys at counter was just like, oh yeah, no, it's still not back up and running. It's taking ages. And I was like, oh, wow, this was months ago. And you really do not realize for a business how much it can take it down until you start to see it in real life. That is such an important way to think about it. And I guess maybe that's an addition that some people need to add on to their tabletop exercise at the end, saying, okay, this was, today, 3 to 6 months. Can we handle that? And that is a really good question to ask.
When they're testing, a lot of the time, they're just testing one system. What happens if they all go down at once? How often are companies testing for that eventuality?
Yeah.
So,
I feel like people are going to come away from this episode now with like so much more work to do. So thanks, Emma. They're probably listening going, oh, now I have to test all of this. But it's true. And it's definitely worth finding out now what would happen rather than finding out during an incident. And I think the other questions I wanted to ask you in this, so for context, I know Emma through Women in Cyber, where we both were volunteer on the community team, and you do internal ops for Women in Cyber. And I've never met someone who's so good at being process driven. Quite frankly, I've never seen someone so organized as yourself, and is well renowned. And when it comes to being organized and getting things done for Women in Cyber, you've achieved that massively. For people trying to get project management done in cybersecurity, do you have any tips and advice to really just get things over the line?
I'd say the main thing is not to try and aim for perfection right at the start. Whenever you're doing any kind of project, you've got input from so many different stakeholders. You've got so many different things that could happen, so many risks involved. So it's doing what you need to do to the best of your ability, but getting it to the people that need to review it and agree to it early enough so that if there's anything comes up or any blockers, you've got plenty of time to address it. There's no point working your way through some sort of plan and project and you've got right to the point where you want to sign the contract and you've got all the stuff in place for how it's going to work when it fits in, and then you take it to your leadership team and they're like, nah, we're not interested in that. You've just spent weeks, possibly months, getting your team to work on that, and it ends up being nothing because you didn't speak to those people early on to get them involved. It might have gone ahead because they might have actually saw the excitement from the team of that new tool or whatever, and got the buy-in really early. Or it could be that they've just identified another 20 risks involved with getting that. And if you got that at the early stages, you could fix that, but too late just doesn't. I guess that's the main thing for keeping it on track, is get people involved early. Doesn't have to be perfect.
That is the perfectionist blocker, especially as well when you want to present security and really you want it to present it as perfect, but it's an industry which is constantly changing. Attacks are constantly coming up, that actually if you took a snapshot at any point in time, nothing is going to be perfect. There will be a patch to be applied. There will be a project going on. There will be something, but it's that actively working towards constantly improving your resilience rather than aiming, because, we all know it. You cannot be completely protected from a cyber attack. You couldn't do it. So that's why resilience comes into play, backups come into play, etc. Approaching projects early on, starting early is a fantastic tip. And so you've been in cyber now for a number of years, and you come in, you do work with women in cyber, you go to lots of conferences and events. And one question I have for you is, what is the best piece of advice that you've received about cybersecurity from someone else in cyber?
Oh, there's so many different things that I've met so many people, and they've all given me a piece of knowledge. One of those ones where everyone tells you, go get a mentor. Okay, go and get a mentor. They'll help guide you. They'll help steer you. They'll tell you what you need to do to get X, Y, and Z. I've never really gone and said, I need a mentor to go and do all this, because I've had so many different influences that have helped with this part of my career and that part of my career. But I'd say if I was to narrow it down to one thing, it would be my previous manager basically saying to me, just go for it. Like, when it came to quite early on in my career and getting the opportunity to speak at a conference. So hadn't even been in the company a year yet. I'd attended a conference in the March. I'd given them feedback because some of the questions that were kind of asked about filling the talent pipeline and the skills and things hadn't really been answered. So I had filled in the questionnaire, and I'd actually tried to direct them to the boot camp that I'd put me through and said maybe they'd be really good to have at your next conference. They invited me to come and sit on a panel and be a person along with like a CISO and heads of, and I felt so out of place. But I remember when I told my manager I'd been asked for it, he's like, are you going to do it? I was like, I don't know. I was quite nerve-wracking. He's like, go for it. Just go for it. Like, what have you got to lose? And I feel like that's kind of what I've then done in every single thing that's come along. It led to me then speaking at another conference, and it led to me meeting some really great people that have managed to get me involved in the industry a lot more, and I've learned from. And it's saying yes to things that terrify you and make you uncomfortable. And it might not always go the way you want it to go, but at least you can say you've tried it and you know what you do like and you know what you don't like. That would be the main one, I would say.
That's an absolutely brilliant piece of advice, and it's great for building your network as well, because we are in an industry where actually talking to one another and working together helps us all, because we're all trying to defend against the same attackers. So building that network, putting yourself in those positions early on in your career, it really can multiply how great things can happen. So thank you so much for that piece of advice. And I guess the last question before we wrap everything up is, for everyone listening to this podcast, if you were to give them one piece of cybersecurity advice, something to look at, something to think about when they take away from this episode, what was that one piece of advice you'd want to give them?
Think about your own cyber hygiene and your own resilience plan. A lot of the time, especially in cybersecurity, there's a lot of burnout and things. So what's your resilience plan for when work's tough and you've got all those assessments going on when you're going towards some sort of certification? There's always the recertification each year when it's really, really busy. What's your own personal resilience plan to combat that? Because the work's always going to be there. But if you end up ill and off sick for a long period of time, then it's your own health that's affected. So think about that.
That is such an important note to end on. So thank you so much, Emma, for that. And thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It was lovely to be here.
And that's a wrap. My biggest takeaways from this conversation are, first, the gap between GRC and SOC is real. And if we want stronger security, we have to connect the risk lens with what's actually happening operationally. Second, vulnerability and patch conversations work best when you translate them into business impact, downtime cost, recovery cost, and real-world examples, not just technical what-ifs. Third, Resilience and regulatory alignment aren't tick box exercises. They're about making sensible decisions consistently, especially within financial services, where regulations like DORA raise the bar on operational resilience. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow or subscribe to Cybersecurity in Focus wherever you listen, and share it with someone who's trying to bring security, risk, and the business onto the same page. Cybersecurity in Focus is a podcast brought to you by Seacon Cyber. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.